All right. So today we're going to talk about what it's like when you've broken up with your ex, but you're still acting like a couple. And I brought in one of our ex recovery coaches, Coach Shaunna Nicol, to basically help us today. We spent, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 10 minutes before we started recording this, basically game planning out what we're going to say so we know exactly what we're going to do. And what Shaunna and I came up with is really there's two sort of core things people want to understand when they're looking at this question. The first one is really defining what that looks like what type of behaviors you are engaging in when you've broken up but still act like a couple. And the second thing is really what does it mean? But anyways, so Shaunna, you are actually you knocked it out of the park when we were kind of talking a little bit about defining what this looks like. So do you want to sort of take the reins here a little bit on looking at sort of what kind of behaviors people engage in when they're still acting like a couple, but they've broken up?
Yeah, sure. So what we discussed was that, when you've had that breakup, but you're still texting them, you're still speaking to them on the phone, you're seeing them on a regular basis, how you still spend that time with that ex, even though you've had the breakup.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if there's too much more to add there other than, you're texting, calling, seeing them regularly. One of the things that I put forth was the idea of you're still intimate, but this doesn't have to be the two of you sleeping together. This can be something as rudimentary as holding hands or even kissing. Do you want to take the next one? Because you're the one that came up with the vacation holiday thing.
Yeah, so the ones that have got some sort of commitment to each other. My example is if you share children and you're deciding to go away together with the children, that's like mixed signals. You're spending time together as a family, even though you're not a couple anymore. So it's like you don't really know where you stand with the other half, but you're still having that family time, that family bond is still there. So it kind of sends that mixed signal of what's going on.
Yeah, it's actually a really good point because one of the things that I think gets lost in translation is the idea of other people connecting you together. So, like when you're going on a vacation or a holiday and you share kids together, it's giving a lot. It's not just giving you mixed signals, but it's also giving the kids mixed signals. And in a weird way, makes everyone's life more difficult. And we're going to get into what it means when your ex is sort of treating this like a relationship still when you've already broken up. But really, the last thing I think that is a behavior that we tend to see when we're dealing with, exes who are still acting like they're, in a relationship with you is they're taking you out on dates. So this is kind of, I guess, an extension of the texting, calling, seeing regularly, except the dates are romantic. Shaunna, you were the one that said like going out on a walk can be kind of considered as, I actually think it can go a step further than that, though. I think it can go full blown romantic dinner together. And oftentimes, what we do see is a lot of times where this becomes a very complicated question is the ex just in it to become intimate with you? Are they in it to, sleep with you, essentially? And I think one of the things that is telling is basically letting it play out and see what happens. So generally speaking, we see people in friends with benefits situations, they'll sleep with their ex and then all of a sudden their ex is nowhere to be found. That is actually not what we're talking about here. That's a different situation. That's, hey, you slept with your ex, you had sort of a one night stand with them, you're friends with benefits potentially. This is almost like no matter what you do, they're still stuck as if the breakup never happened, but you're still broken up, which is an even more difficult situation for many people to be in because they're left often confused, which leads them to ask the question of, what does it mean? Now, so Shaunna, you want to take the sort of the fear of moving on aspect, but I guess
Cool.
I think it's best prefaced if I go with my contribution. So Shaunna and I basically worked on this video / podcast episode / article together. We came up with sort of like 3 key components on understanding or helping you understand what it means when you're broken up and still act like a couple. So my contribution was sort of timely. Right before Shaunna and I hopped on to this call, I had written an article on avoidance and if they feel guilt. And one of the things that I found fascinating when I was researching this subject is how avoidance will often hold on to guilt as an excuse to avoid a commitment. And what I think usually happens when you get into a relationship with someone and they're still acting like a couple, when they've broken up with you is that it's a very classic avoidant behavior where they're avoiding a commitment, but they're still getting the benefits of a relationship. So the avoidant, you need to understand they have this contradictory nature, which is on the one hand, they want love. And on the other hand, they don't want to let anyone close enough to give them that love. And so they're constantly at odds with themselves. And I think what we see here often is an extension of that contradiction. So you get into a relationship with them, they break up with you, but they still want to act like a couple because they still want that benefits that you get from being in a couple, but they don't like the commitment. And so they're kind of keeping you at an arm's length by still having their cake and eating it too, essentially. You want to take on the, which I think is actually arguably the best sort of definition of what it means, the fear of moving on?
Yeah, sure. So what I was saying was the fear of like letting that person go. You don't want to be with them, but you also don't want them to move on. You want them like on the hook so that you can come back to them if you don't find somebody better. So spending that time with them, making sure that they're still there, hoping that you're going to change your mind, you're going to come back to them. If they're nice enough that you somehow just get back together just because you spent all this time together. And the ultimate thing is that they're scared that you're going to find someone else and you're going to move on, and then you're no longer an option to the ex anymore.
Yeah, which is really interesting when you pair it with the avoidant thing, because typically speaking, avoidance wants you to move on. But what I think happens here is you need to understand there's two types of avoidance. There's the dismissive avoidant, which usually is all in on avoidant behaviors. And then there's the fearful avoidant. I would argue that most of the people that are broken up with you but still act like a couple are more likely to be fearful avoidance than dismissive avoidance. So like Shaunna says, they're afraid of letting you move on. They don't want to let you go. So they're keeping you on the hook. And that's really their anxious side coming out. And it's weird, Shaunna. I mean, I don't know if you were intending this at all when you listed it out, but there's almost like a jealousy aspect here. Like they know they're not going to do well with jealousy if they let you go when you're with someone else. It's sort of like they don't want to see you happy with anyone else except them, but they don't want to get into a full-blown relationship with you. And that's really their anxious side coming out. And then they get ruled by their avoidance side. So they're constantly at odds with one another. And this is often really classic with why the mixed signals are happening, because people, when they get into relationships with fearful avoidance, are often left really confused because on one hand, their ex is giving them very like, hey, we're still together type signals. And then on the other hand, they're like, no, we're not together. And the mixed signals confuse people. And that's really common for a fearful avoidant individual. Anyways, you want to take the next and the last and final sort of insight we gleaned?
Yeah, sure. So what we were saying was that how when you've been together for a while, you fall into this routine and this habit of spending time with that person, talking to that person. And we see it with most of the clients that come to the program. They are so obsessed with reaching out to their ex. They need to speak to their ex. They're just thinking about what they're doing, who they're spending time with. And that's why we enforce the no contact rule, telling them that they need to spend that time not focusing on their ex. Whereas those that fall into the habits can't seem to just pull themselves away.
Yeah, I think the no contact analogy is really good because we're seeing sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, which is like we're seeing most of the time the people who've been broken up with, and they're really stuck into their habitual routines. And so what we're trying to do often is get them to break that habit by doing something extreme, which is the no contact rule. And for many, they really struggle with this because those habits of talking every day, being able to pour your heart out to this one individual and have them listen to you, that's embedded in their routine. And when you take that away, they start to kind of panic. But what no one really considers is the fact that the same thing occurs to an ex. By you potentially giving them a no contact rule, they also freak out and they'll try to kind of keep things together. So I think in a weird way, if you've formed these habits together, it's a common thing of just wanting to keep things the way they are. And the one big insight I think you can sort of learn from this discussion Shaunna and I are having is human beings tend to be resistant towards change. They don't like change. And a breakup is a big change. And even if they're ones to enact the breakup, they'll still resist it. And that's often why they're acting like a couple still. So I think like when you're looking at the fact that they're avoidant, but at the same time, they're afraid of letting you go. So they have fearful avoidant tendencies. They're afraid of letting you go. The habit of being together and trusting you is so embedded, it becomes difficult to just let you, to drop you, to ghost you, to whatever, the synonymous behaviors with breakups. So it's not necessarily like a complicated thing to understand why people are acting like they're still a couple. I think the complicated thing revolves around dealing with it.